Mhm. We are recording.
Okay. So we're ready to begin?
Indeed.
Okay. Well,
Should we go in?
yeah.
Also, and John and Michael, I think it's best if I don't spotlight anyone since we're having everyone participate in the reading, right?
Fine with me.
So welcome everyone to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. We're working our way through Shantideva's Bodhicharya Avatara, entering the path of the Bodhisattva. Michael is teaching tonight. So Michael, take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you and welcome everyone. We are continuing with chapter 6 on patience in the way of the Bodhisattva. We have 70 verses to cover tonight, but before we move further, I just wanted to review a couple of things from what we talked about last week and just remind people of what we did discuss because it lays the foundation for what we'll be talking about tonight. I also wanted to say that for the other classes, I've relied primarily on commentaries by Pema and the commentary by Kunzeg Palden. But tonight I'm relying almost entirely, or primarily I should say, on a commentary by Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche, who has an entire book called Peaceful Heart that is entirely about this 6th chapter. And if you're interested in reading more about patience, I really recommend this book. He really goes into detail about all of the verses, and I've tried to extract what I think is most helpful and interesting. So, as I say, last week we began talking about patience, and Shantideva began by talking about how damaging the expression of aggression and anger is in terms of our merit, our life, our karma, as well as the potency and power of patience as a remedy or the practice that we can engage in order to remedy anger and aggression. And he had a number of different ways that he talks about that we could look at situations or think about situations differently to reduce aggression and anger. But I wanted to begin tonight by talking about 2 paragraphs that Dzigar Kongtrul actually comments on quite extensively in the beginning. So let me put up the screen and I'll actually read these myself. So verse 7, getting what I do not want and all that hinders my desire. In discontent, my anger finds its fuel. From this it grows and beats me down. So what we're talking about here is what kinds of experiences, what kinds of thinking, what kinds of pursuits lead to anger. And in Dzigar Kongtrul's commentary, as well as Kunzeg Palden's, and also in Pema's, this essentially boils down to what are traditionally called the 8 worldly concerns, or the 8 worldly dharmas. That what we want is pleasure of any kind, physical, emotional, mental. We want gain in terms of wealth or material resources or whatever it is that we think will bring us happiness. That could be anything we actually want to collect and hold on to and possess. We like praise and we like renown or good reputation. And these bring stress, discomfort, discontent, depression when we don't have them. And then on the other side, the mirror opposite of pleasure is suffering, which is quite clearly discomfort and pain. And when we do have that, then we also become discontented, angered, agitated. Similarly, harsh words, any type of criticism, blame, or judgment, any sense of being defamed, having a bad reputation, or being insignificant, feeling that we're not recognized at all, overlooked. That these are the things that when we don't have what we want, or when we get these things that we don't want, then we experience the fuel or the food, you could say, for anger. And then in verse 11, he expounds a little bit further on these. So we have pain, humiliation, insults, or rebukes. And in the commentary, humiliation is compared to loss. So again, these are the things we don't want. And that it's said that, in fact, between these 8 factors, the things that we want but don't have, or the things that we don't want but do experience, that in fact these lead to 72 different things that can bring us discomfort, discontent, depression, irritation, that provides the fuel for anger. And the reason that it's 72 is that we not only feel this way about ourselves, but we also can become upset based on the experiences of people that we care about or identify with, whether they are experiencing not getting the things that they want or experiencing that they want. And it's the mirror reverse for those that we see as enemies or opponents of some kind. We become upset when they do gain, when they do have pleasure, when they do experience some kind of praise. And so this, basically the logic of this is you multiply 8 times 3 and you have 24. And then how do you get to 72? Well, also multiply it by past, present, and future. We can get upset about gain or loss in the past, for instance. We can get upset, worked up over gain and loss that we imagine we might experience in the future, or that our loved ones might experience, or that our enemies might experience, except that with enemies, we want the reverse of what we want for ourselves or those that we identify with and love. So that's essentially the fuel that feeds anger. And in the verses that we're going to explore tonight, and actually one set that we started last week, we're looking at some of Shantideva's advice about how to handle situations in which we either, or the people we love, or the people that we feel opposed to, either get what they want or get what they don't want. All of these potential 72 different possibilities. Although he doesn't talk as much about past, present, and future. It's just that we should realize that we can get upset about things that happened a long time ago, and we can get ourselves worked up about things we imagine might happen in the future. And all of this really reminds me of something that a teacher once said when I was taking a class in Madhyamaka, that what Buddhism asks us to do is actually very simple, that it's simply a matter of being able to, particularly in meditation practice, simply be present, simply let go, simply relax. That what's complicated is samsaric mind, our belief in ego, our attachments, and all of the behaviors and actions that leads to. And I think thinking of 72 gives us a good idea of how that might be the case. So with that, I'm going to jump ahead to verse 64, as we ended on verse 63 last week. Pema calls all of this part of the chapter on patience, from actually verses 52 to the end, as specific situations for practicing patience. We talked about verses 52 to 63 last week, which related to anger that comes from being scorned or criticized or blamed. And we went through some of Shantideva's logic about how to deal with that. This section that begins with verse 64 relates to anger that arises when those we love, or you could say those we identify with, are attacked or scorned in some way. So that is what these sections, verses 64 to 75, relate to, how to deal with the anger that arises when we see that someone that we identify with or love is being attacked or scorned in some way. So could somebody read verse 64?
Carolyn.
Even those who vilify and undermine the sacred doctrine, images and stupas, are not proper objects of our anger. Buddhas are themselves untouched thereby.
So this might not be something that particularly upsets us, or it might, depending on how strongly we identify as Buddhists. But you can imagine that the audience that Shantideva was talking to was an assembly of monks who, very strongly saw themselves, identified with themselves as Buddhists. So for them, it could spark anger to see the Dharma or images of the Buddha at stupas being scorned, destroyed, or marred in some way. Shantideva points out that this doesn't really make sense. And the reason for this is that the essence of what the Buddha is and the essence of what the Dharma is beyond harm. That the essence of what the Buddha teaches is the enlightened mind, which is beyond our need for protection. So therefore, it's not really a valid cause for anger. Is perhaps a little more difficult to see something that's, again, if we could think about the anger we might experience when someone with an opposing political belief or personal belief happens, because in that case, there might be something that we do feel that we have to defend. But in some cases, or in some sense, it really boils down to if we have a sense of the truth of the position that we're upholding, it doesn't really need our defense. And that's essentially what he's saying here. So could somebody read verse 65?
Trip.
And even if our teachers, relatives, and friends are now the object of aggression, all derives from factors, as we have explained. This we should perceive and curb our wrath.
So again, as we talked about last week and the week before, the advice that we had, that Shantideva presented in discussing the paramita of discipline or vigilant introspection, was that when we saw anger arise, we should be like a log, which means not taking the next step in terms of our thoughts, our speech, or action, but to be able to rest in awareness and see what we're thinking, see what we're feeling, and begin to look at what really makes sense, what's really skillful, or what might be appropriate in the situation. So the first thing with this verse, if our teachers are the object of aggression is exactly what our teachers would not want us to do. So it makes no sense at all to become aggressive, to express hatred on behalf of the teachers. And for relatives and friends, when they are now the object of aggression, what we need to keep in mind is, again, the sense that anger arises from causes and conditions, as was explained. We discussed this last week as well, so that we can actually look into the situation with greater discernment and see that, again, that everything we experience arises from causes and conditions. So we would do our best not to lash out in anger. Although, as Ziegler Contral says, this doesn't mean passivity. If we can stop harm from occurring without aggression, we should do so. But again, we need to keep in mind that everything arises from causes and conditions. He also says that none of us can stop disturbing emotions from arising in our mind. But what defines us as practitioners is what we do when these emotions arise. That it can be really difficult not to act out of aggression once it arises, especially if a person has an unchecked habit of doing so. And we need to keep in mind that they're not in control, that keeping this in mind helps us manage our aggression. So this is, again, a point that he made last week as well, that anger arises out of causes and conditions. And in a sense, as we see in our own experience, it's not what we would choose if we were able to stay in awareness. And so we see that the other person as well loses control out of the causes and conditions that evoke aggression. Could someone read verse 66?
Steve.
Beings suffer injury alike from lifeless things as well as living beings. So why be angry only with the latter? Rather, let us simply bear with harm.
Here, this is a point that, again, is similar to one of the points we discussed last week, that we're able to see, we don't blame inanimate things when something happens. The example that Pema gives is a branch that falls on our head. We might not like it, but we don't particularly become angry at the branch itself. And in the same way, Ziegler Contral gives as an example an earthquake that could destroy a temple, one of the stupas that we talked about in verse 64. But there again, we don't become angry because we know there's no real act of will involved. And the point is that we could see people in the same way, that they're not making a clear choice, but they're driven by emotion and ignorance. In the same way, this is how we tend to look at the actions of very young children. We attribute selfish or aggressive behavior to the fact that they're young and don't know better and haven't developed any sense of self-control. So the point is that we could experience this same kind of equanimity to sentient beings as we do with inanimate things, or for that matter, young children. Could somebody read verses 67 and 68?
Philip.
Some do evil things because of ignorance. Some respond with anger, being ignorant. Which of them is faultless in such acts? To whom shall error be ascribed? Instead, why did they act in times gone by that they are now so harmed at others' hands? Since everything depends on karma, why should I be angry at such things?
Okay, so this is continuing actually with the point that we began to discuss with verse 66, that people act in aggression out of ignorance. People do evil things out of ignorance. So when a person responds with anger, that's equally ignorant. So which of them is a greater fault? To whom should error be assigned? So that's the first thing that Shantideva asks us to consider. Then the second point is that people act out as a result of karma. It comes out of karmic results. And as Zigar Contral points out, that if we just continue this chain of ignorance, beginning with the evil deed that arises out of ignorance, and then a retaliation that rises out of ignorance, that it's the equivalent of an eye for an eye that leaves the world blind. So when we're angry, once someone's angry, we tend to justify feelings with all kinds of good reasons for why we should think and act in angry ways. And it's seeing this storyline that we need to be able to let go of. And again, Zigar Contral makes the point that this does not mean abandoning or suppressing discriminative mind. He asks, how else would you choose a business partner, or for that matter, a spouse, or even a spiritual teacher? But that we need to think clearly about how to join our intentions with actions. And at the same time, we can't overlook characteristics in self or other that make it difficult to work together. So it's not a question of abandoning discriminative mind, but it's a question of letting go of anger, aggression, and hatred that further clouds the mind and gets us to react in unthinking, blind ways based on aggression. So it's a question of being able to use critical thinking without aggressive judgment, or how to work skillfully, how to be critical based on positive effectiveness rather than actions and feelings based on the 8 worldly concerns, so that we can be compassionate and not self-focused. I also wanted to say something about karmic results and debts, because this is something that will come up again tonight as we go through. Whether we believe in karma or not, whether we believe in rebirth or not, and the potential for being born into different realms, this is something that each one of us has to decide on our own. For one thing, it is quite well described by the Buddha. It's clearly what the Buddha taught. But even if we were to choose not to believe it, or to at least have some doubt about it, we can at least see how thinking in that way could lead to, in other words, being very aware that our actions in the moment create causes and conditions that will affect what happens in the next moment, can get us to be much more careful, much more thoughtful, much more kind and compassionate in terms of what we choose to do. And seeing that the causes and conditions that might have happened in the past create conditions that make it more difficult to be aware, awake, and compassionate in the present. And therefore, people engage in, as he said, evil things because of ignorance. We can have more compassion for others who are not in control, or not fully aware of what they're doing. So Could somebody read verse 69?
Lodro.
This I see, and therefore, come what may, I'll hold fast to the virtuous path, and foster in the hearts of all an attitude of mutual love.
So this kind of sums up what we've been talking about for the last few minutes, that when we come to understand that people do things because of causes and conditions, that we may attribute deliberation to them, and there may be some deliberation, I won't deny that, but that ultimately, because beings are blinded by ignorance, confusion, passion, and aggression, that they act out in evil ways due to ignorance, that we can see that we would experience the need to be compassionate and understanding in our behavior rather than simply being retaliative and aggressive in response. And that's what he means by foster in the hearts of all an attitude of mutual love. And that basically we come to understand, at least, certainly for ourselves, that acting on the basis of our attachments and aversions tends to make things worse, especially since we come to realize through our practice and study that all of these attachments and aversions are very temporary in nature. We can see that how we feel, what we believe about things changes all the time, that how we feel now is very different from how we might have felt a month or a year ago, so that we can begin to let go of attachments, which is exactly what the next couple of verses are all about. So could somebody read verses 70 and 71?
Henry.
Now, when a building is ablaze and flames leap out from house to house, the wise course is to take and fling away the straw and anything that spreads the fire. And so, in fear that merit might be all consumed, we should at once cast far away our mind's attachments, tinder for the fiery flames of hate.
So here we're talking about quite directly removing the fuel, the food that anger feeds on, which primarily comes down to the attachments that we have, the attachments to trying to get what we want and the attachment to avoiding the things that we don't want. So again, the point is that the 8 worldly concerns, pain and pleasure, gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and insignificance, or how there are a lot of different translations, but that these 8 worldly concerns are like combustible material that can burn us, and that we want to free ourselves as soon as we realize that the building is ablaze, which means that we begin to realize that our mind is disturbed, agitated, that we're becoming irritated, that we're becoming increasingly worked up and angry. And this is, first of all, where we should be like a log, although logs burn too. He doesn't mention that. But the idea is that we want to begin to work free of the attachments. We want to weed out the attachments that cause us to become angry, irritated, upset, depressed, discontent, all of the things that fuel our anger, fuel our aggression, fuel our hatred. Zigar Contral says that attachment always has its basis in self-centeredness or some extension of self and possession. And that it's, for us as ordinary beings, it's natural that there'll be a mix of attachment and genuine love, but that we need to reflect on the connections between attachments and other painful emotions and states of mind. And he also says, as he does with other experiences, other types of things that we want to reject in our experience, that we need to root out attachments without self-loathing or without self-condemnation. He says, first of all, there's no true self to loathe or condemn. And that secondly, could think of self-loathing that it could be considered as a form of extra strength ego. And that the point is that rather than giving in to self-loathing, giving in to self-condemnation, which is, he says, is like extra strength ego, just acknowledge that you, like all beings in samsara, have this delusion of believing in a self. And we aspire to let go of clinging and let our natural virtue, our natural basic goodness, wakefulness, and kindness shine and grow. So the idea here, though, is we want to as soon as we recognize we're becoming escalated, as soon as we recognize we've been triggered, wake up, take that as a wake-up call, and apply whatever antidotes we can so that we're able to relate skillfully with and compassionately with the situation rather than reacting aggressively. Could someone read verses 72 and 73?
Mark.
Hi. Is it not a happy chance if, when condemned to death, a man is freed, his hand cut off in ransom for his life? And is it not a happy chance if now, to escape hell, I suffer only the misfortunes of the human state? If even these, my present pains, are now beyond my strength to bear, why do I not cast off my anger, cause of future sorrows in infernal torment?
So with these verses, he's elaborating further on this need to wake up, let go, be present, be compassionate and kind. That essentially in verse 72, what he's talking about is, yes, it may take some effort and there may be some strain to having to hold back, to having to not just give in to habit, that it may take some work and persistent effort to change habits. But that's better than giving in to anger and all the consequences of anger. And the metaphor that he gives for this is somebody who is facing death, but instead has his hand cut off, which is an interesting commentary on what seems to be the justice system in India 1,000 years ago. But maybe a different way to think about it would be someone who's facing the death penalty and instead somehow has a much lighter sentence. That this is how we should be thinking, that whatever strain, whatever difficulty there is in practicing patience, that it's far better or far better off than we would be if we were to not be able to work with our anger and just give in to our habitual patterns. And then he goes on to say that that these present pains, as difficult as they may be, whatever present experience of suffering and difficulty and challenge we may be having in our lives, that we should understand that, in fact, not working with our anger, not working with our aggressive states of mind and practicing patience will lead to a far worse outcome. Could somebody read verses 74 and 75?
Sarah.
For sake of gaining all that I desired, 1,000 times I underwent the tortures of the realms of hell, achieving nothing for myself and others. The present aches are nothing to compare with those, and yet great benefits will come from them. These troubles that dispel the pain of wanderers, it's only right that I rejoice in them.
So all of these verses, 72 through 75, he's really asking us to keep in perspective what we're doing in pursuing the path and what's at stake when we, again, give in to habitual patterns, when we give in to aggression, when we're not able to remain in awareness and be compassionate and kind. And that whatever difficulty that might bring is nothing compared to the consequences, the karmic consequences that occur when we give in to aggression and anger. He's also saying that whatever, in verse 75, whatever present aches are nothing, verses 74 and 75, for sake of gaining all that I desired. He's talking about all of the challenges we face in this life, but not only this life, in all the lifetimes that we might have led. Again, this, the Buddha very clearly taught that we taught the doctrine of rebirth, and that we actually had many, many, many countless existences before our present one. That whatever difficulty we may face now is nothing compared to the difficulties we have experienced in previous lives. Nothing compared to the difficulty we could experience in future lives if we continue in a mindless way. And again, he's really asking us to keep in perspective what we're doing here and now in the present moment. I really liked what Zigar Contral had to say in regard to these verses, and again, keeping some perspective in terms of what we're working with. So I'm going to just read a little bit, some of his comments. And the point that he makes is whatever struggles we may be going through now in our lives, that our present circumstances are about as good as it gets in samsara. This doesn't mean we might not have complaints. We might be able to imagine ways in which it can be better, but that we should appreciate that we're not born in dire poverty without food or shelter, that we're not born in war zones, that we're not born as animals in factory farms just facing slaughter. That there are many more painful existences, even in the world that we can see, let alone the realms that we're not able to see, like the hungry ghost and hell realm. And that this is all thanks to karma, that we're able to be in this present life, that we're able to hear and practice and use our experience of suffering to develop peace, freedom, and strength in our minds, and therefore to benefit others. In other words, we should be overjoyed at our precious human birth, which is one of the contemplations we do every day in our practice. And he said, well, he furthermore says, there's not usually much we can do about emotions and mental states that naturally occur in response to outer events. We don't have much choice about what initially arises in our mind streams, but what happens next can be within the realm of our choice. The wisdom of Dharma gives us a choice not to react, physically, verbally, mentally, in a predictable, habitual manner. We become more conscious of the workings of our minds and more able to choose how we react. We create negative karma when we mindlessly indulge in emotions such as anger. The only reason emotions like anger, jealousy, and pride are labeled negative is that they're focused on cherishing and protecting ourselves at the expense of others. And he says the word negative is a translation of digpa in Tibetan, which literally means heavy with consequences. And that in fact, in contrast, we create positive karma when we focus on the well-being of others. Karma may seem predestined, but that's only the case if we're unaware of the moment-to-moment experience of the mind. Karma is constantly ripening for us, but how we respond and what we do with what arises is wide open. By practicing mindfulness and self-reflection, we become more aware of our internal states and more aware of the danger of letting negativity run free. Only in doing so can we become proficient at transforming our karma from negative to positive. But all this has to be done without harsh self-judgment. We're much better off when we can take joy in our wonderful opportunity to root out harmful habits of the mind. And that such progress is within reach of all of us as long as we work with our experience rather than rejecting what karma brings to us. But in order not to reject what is arising, we need to apply patience. To let our ordinary habits dictate how we respond to our ripening karma is to go through our life just like someone who's never heard the Dharma. For example, if someone treats you unjustly and you fall back on your right to respond with aggression and make a tremendous effort to get justice or get even, you'll be sowing the same karmic seeds again and again. So in essence, this is what Shantideva is telling us here, that to keep perspective in terms of what we're doing moment to moment. Okay, so could somebody read verse 76?
Carolyn.
When others take delight in giving praise to those endowed with talents, why, O mind, do you not find cause of future a joy likewise in praising them?
Okay, so starting with verse 76, we've actually entered into a different section. We're beginning to work with jealousy, what we experience when others get what we want, or especially when enemies or people we don't like get what they want. So this is related to praise and gain and so on, but the point is that jealousy also serves as food for anger, and that patience so we're looking at patience as an antidote to jealousy. So that what this means is patience isn't simply being able to endure or bear with challenges and difficulties, although that's part of it, but it's really being able to keep a greater perspective, an open mind, to be able to rest in awareness, to have some steadiness in our experience of awareness, so that, again, we're not swept away. We're not caught up in habits and patterns, so that we're not, like Zigar Contral says, letting our ordinary habits dictate how we respond, so that we go through life just like someone who's never heard the Dharma. So here we're beginning to look at what it means, the jealousy, particularly jealousy that arises when someone is praised, someone other is praised. When others take delight in giving praise to those endowed with talents, oh, why, O mind, do you not find the joy likewise in praising them? So basically, we should look at why people praise, and that basically people praise because it's an expression of their inspiration or connection or appreciation and joy in another. That we praise when we see a quality or action we appreciate. So why, what Shantideva is asking is why, when we see it happening to others, why don't we join in with the pleasure? Why don't we enjoy the same positive emotion to the person praising? And if we don't believe in the praise, at least not get irritated. So that rather than becoming jealous or competitive when we see someone getting praised, particularly someone that we're opposed to in some way, that in fact we could have experienced some sense of happiness, that there's some positive quality there. And if we do get irritated, we need to ask why. That the person giving the praise isn't trying to provoke us. And if we look, we can see that basically it comes down to ego being threatened by being ignored. But why do we take the praise of others as personal? And Zigar Contral's point here is that we can actually have some humor about our occasional petty attitudes. That it's ironic that we want others to be happy for us, but we're unwilling to be happy for someone else. And that instead, again, if we're able to be patient, if we're able to be steady in our awareness and compassion, we could open our hearts. So could somebody read verse 77?
Steve.
The pleasure that is gained therefrom itself gives rise to blameless happiness. It's urged on us by all the holy ones and is the perfect way of winning others.
So basically what we're being asked in this entire section, or what we're being reminded of as the possibility of what we could do, is to engage in what's traditionally called sympathetic joy, finding happiness in the happiness of others rather than asking, what about me, and falling into jealousy. Zigar Contral said that the Buddha said that sympathetic joy, the happiness of rejoicing for others, is a supreme joy, that it's blameless happiness. And the reason for that is that it's unrelated to the 8 worldly concerns that are based on self-cherishing, that it's free of struggle, free of attachment and aversion. That blameless happiness is not a joy that comes from someone else's loss, whether we intended for them to lose or not, that it's really something where everyone gains. And then the last point that he makes is it also wins over others, that it's actually helpful to others as well. Also say that sympathetic joy, rejoicing in the happiness of others, doesn't necessarily come automatically, but it can be cultivated. As Zigar Contral says, it begins when we see that jealousy is self-inflicted torture without any positive aspect. That it comes when we start to see that when jealousy arises, we're getting caught in ego's self-centered demands. And if we think about it, it is something that we experience naturally in limited circumstances. That parents, for instance, can take great joy in their children's successes. And yes, there might be an element of identification and bragging, but to some extent it is selfless. And in the same way, when children are grown and independent, they might take joy in seeing their parents do things that their parents enjoy. So again, we can experience sympathetic joy. We can experience pleasure and joy in someone else's happiness. That it's not foreign to us, but it's an experience that can be cultivated. And that's essentially what a great deal of this section is about, as well as helping us see through jealousy and the lack of logic and the harmfulness of jealousy. So could somebody read verses 78 and 79?
Philip.
But they're the ones who will have the happiness, you say. If this then is a joy you would resent, abandon paying wages and returning favors. You will be the loser, both in this life and the next. When praise is heaped upon your qualities, you're keen that others should be pleased thereby. But when the compliment is paid to others, you feel no inclination to rejoice as well.
Okay, so the point that's being made here is that resenting the happiness of others is unhealthy and damaging. And the first point that Shantideva makes is that if we feel resentful that when someone gets happiness and we don't, that if that's what we think, why should we want happiness for everyone? And he compares this to what it would be like if we had somebody who worked for us, but we didn't pay them wages. We didn't pay them because we don't want them to be happy, or we somehow resent their happiness. Or that somebody does a favor, but we never return favors because we don't want people to be happy. And it's very clear if we were to act in this way that we would be the loser, certainly in this life. And again, if we believe in rebirth in the next life as well, because of the lack of compassion. And then in verse 79, what he says is we feel good when we're praised or rewarded or recognized in some way. And we also know that others are happy when they give praise. That, in other words, when we see something positive in somebody else and we're moved to offer some kind of praise or acknowledgement, that we're feeling good. So it actually is a happy feeling on both parts. But we don't want to allow ourselves to experience sympathetic joy. It doesn't make sense. That the joy felt by so basically it doesn't make sense not to allow ourselves to experience sympathetic joy. Could somebody read verses 80 to 83, where he will continue to talk about sympathetic joy and jealousy?
Mark.
You who want the happiness of beings have wished to be enlightened for their sake. So why should others irk you when they find some pleasure for themselves? And if you claim to wish that beings be enlightened, honored by the triple world, when petty marks of favor come their way, why are you so discomforted? When dependents who rely on you, to whom you are obligated to give support, find for themselves the means of livelihood, will you not be happy? Will you once again be angry?
Oh, could you read verse 83 also?
Sorry. If even this you do not want for beings, why could you want Buddhahood for them? And how can anyone have bodhicitta who is angry when another prospers?
So here he's really going through the illogical nature of being resentful when others get praise, particularly if we've taken bodhisattva vow. Again, remember that he's speaking to an audience of monks who most certainly would have taken bodhisattva vows. But even if we haven't taken the vow, if we have any aspiration toward the benefit of all sentient beings, any thought of wishing happiness and freedom and enlightenment for all beings. So what he's saying is, we say we want the happiness of beings in verse 80. We wish them to be enlightened for their sake. So why should we be upset when they find some pleasure for themselves? Why do we get upset when petty marks of favor come their way? And he even says in verse 82 that it's not unlike if we were to have someone who's dependent on us, who finally is able to become independent, that we should be happy about this. Why would we be angry that beings have found ways to be happy in their own way? And then finally, to continue, if even this you don't want for beings, then how could we say we want Buddhahood for them, which is the ultimate happiness? And how can anyone have bodhicitta who's angry when another person prospers? It's just saying that this attitude of jealousy, competitiveness, resentment is anti-bodhicitta, essentially. So verse 84.
Henry.
If someone else receives a gift, or if that gift stays in the benefactor's house, in neither case will it be yours. So given or withheld, why is it your concern?
So again, remember that all of these verses relate to helping us see through jealousy, competitiveness, and the resentment that we experience when somebody else experiences something that we would like to experience. So the point that he's making here is, if it wouldn't have come to us anyway, whether it was given by another person or not, why do we become concerned? If something, and again, this is another place where we might even be able to see some humor in how ego can be like a spoiled child, always wanting to be the center of everything. Pema's point here is, when someone gets a reward or recognition that we feel isn't deserved, we can either let it destroy our peace or let it go. But either way, it wasn't coming to us. And so again, there's not a reason to be attached to it. Could someone read verses 85 and 86?
Sarah.
All your merit and the faith of others, all your sterling qualities, why throw them all away, not holding on to what might bring you riches? Tell me, why are you not angry at yourself? Not only do you feel no sorrow for the evils you have done, you even wish to match yourself with those whose merit has been earned.
So the point that's being made here is that jealousy that someone else gets something that we want or might think that we would want, not only won't get us what we want, but it'll get us what we don't want, that it creates the karma for future failing. And so that in a sense, we should be more annoyed with ourselves at this point for giving in. Why are you not angry at yourself? And again, if someone else gets something that we want, it's because the point that Zigar Contral makes, Kunzig Palden makes, and that Pema makes, is that if someone else gets something that we want, it's because of their merit. And that what we should do instead is continue to work on ourselves, work on our practice, work on our compassion and kindness, rather than becoming jealous or competitive. The next set of verses, 87 through 89, relate to a different circumstance. So we've just talked about letting go of seeing through jealousy and instead practicing sympathetic joy. In this next section, verses 87, 88, and 89, we're talking about not taking pleasure in someone else's pain, or how we tend to react when bad things happen to people we don't like or feel competitive with, their enemies. And what this compared to, the type of pleasure we could take in the misfortunes of others, it's said to be like a baited hook. And what Shantideva is going to ask us here is, what really makes us happy? What about this situation makes us happy? How does this really benefit us? And do we think do we believe these things happen because of our wish for others to suffer? So could somebody read verses 87 through 89?
Carolyn.
If unhappiness befalls your enemies, why should this be cause for your rejoicing? The wishes of your mind alone will not, in fact, contrive their injury. And if your hostile wishes were to bring them harm, again, what cause of joy is that to you? Why then, I would be satisfied. Are these your thoughts? Is anything more ruinous than that? Caught upon the hook, unbearable and sharp, cast by the fisherman my own defilements, I'll be flung into the cauldrons of the pit and surely boiled by all the janitors of hell.
So he's really letting us know here that wishing harm to others, which again is the antithetical to the Bodhisattva vow, to developing bodhicitta, that the baited hook is the suffering of others. The fisherman is our own defilements, our passion, aggression, and ignorance, particularly our aggression, although passion and ignorance also fit in here. And that by acting on these, we'll be, as he says, flung into the cauldrons of the pit and boiled by all the janitors of hell. And if we go back, again, the point is that unpleasant things happen to others due to their karma, which has nothing to do with our negative wishes for them. And even if we had no such wish, we should ask ourselves whether this wishing for negative experiences for others, whether this is a noble and desirable state of mind. And if not, we should rid ourselves of malevolent states of mind that beyond an initial flash that we might experience. It's, again, as Zigar Contral says, we can't stop negative thoughts from appearing in our mind. But what does matter is what we do next when we recognize that that's what's happening, so that we don't give in and we don't bite the hook and go further with taking great joy in the misfortunes of others. And again, altogether, with all of these practices, it really comes down to self-reflection, vigilant introspection. And if we see hidden faults, acknowledge and regret them without self-loathing, and let them go through meditation and contemplation. I'm going to suggest that we sit for just a moment before we move into the next section, which is 21 verses on the practicing patience when we don't get what we want. So before we do that, if everyone could just take a good posture and straighten your back, settle, let go of everything that we've talked about so far for just a moment. Just feel the breath. Particularly the out breath. Just as we practice every morning and evening, as we breathe out, just let go, relax. In meditation, there are no good thoughts, no bad thoughts. We just simply see it all resting in awareness. Whereas, as we talked about last week, in activity, there are actions we want to accept or adopt and actions we want to reject. Here, there's not. We just experience resting in awareness without judgment or effort of any kind. Okay, so we're going to begin with verses 90 and 91 in just a moment. But remember, all of these verses are Shantideva's advice, things we can practice, ways that we can change our attitude, or ways in which we can look at our thinking so that we can practice patience when we don't get what we want. So could somebody read verses 90 and 91?
Trip.
Veneration, praise, and fame serve not to increase merit or my span of life, bestowing neither health nor strength, and nothing for the body's ease. If I am wise in what is good for me, I'll ask what benefit these bring, for if it's entertainment I desire, I might as well resort to alcohol and cards.
Right, so what we're being asked to do here is to consider the futility and the harmfulness, but at a minimum, the futility of the conventional pursuits. And again, primarily this is summed up in the 8 worldly dharmas, seeking praise, fame, gain of some kind, as well as pleasure or comfort in some way. And the first point that Shantideva makes is that this pursuit does not do anything to increase merit or span of life, nor do they bring health nor strength, and nothing for the body's ease. So the first thing we should ask ourselves, this is again Ziegler Conkel's advice, is why do we have these desires to begin with? Do these things have true value to us, or are we following mindless social values mindlessly? Is this just our acculturation rather than what we truly want or what we truly value? And ask ourselves, what do praise, fame, and so on really do for us? And I just point out, again, this is from my psychological training background, actually from Psych 101. One of the interesting things about the eight worldly dharmas, especially the things that we want, praise, gain, fame, and pleasure or comfort, however you want to define that, that essentially the way that samsara works is that it's like an intermittent reinforcement schedule, which if you remember from Psych 101 is the most powerful reinforcement schedule of all. It's what leads to a gambling mentality. That because all of the things that we experience in samsara that seem positive, at least in the beginning, before they go sour, they're not constant. They happen to us sometimes. That we get something like a new house or a car, a new relationship, or we get praised about something. We get a new possession that we like. But that none of these things really fundamentally alter our state of mind. In other words, they don't increase our merit. That seeking renown, pleasant words in our ears, getting VIP service in situations, that really what this comes out of is a very narrow mindset based on cherishing the self. And that in particular, we can look at people who engage in an unhealthy pursuit of, say, wealth or fame or success. And you can see, people who become driven, totally caught up in these pursuits and lose their health as a result of this, that there is illness caused by stress, lack of balance in life. And this is what he means exactly by the not bringing health or health nor strength, and that these pursuits don't bring any kind of mental health either, that the more people get caught up in pursuing gain or fame or success, fame is kind of an interesting one given social media in particular nowadays, with the things that people do to become influencers or stupid pranks that people do in order to get likes or get lots of watches on videos because you can apparently make money doing anyway. That what happens is the more people tend to pursue these things, what tends to happen is that people become more self-centered, more desiring of maintaining whatever it is that they get, more anxious, more protective, rather than becoming more friendly or open. Not everyone, but most people. So that the point is what we're being asked to do is we really need to examine our drives and desires. If I am wise in what is good for me, we need to examine our drives and desires and decide how our time is best spent. That we should come to value cultivating awareness and bodhicitta or compassion and valuing the practices that lead us to enlightenment. This is what Shantideva is really asking us to consider here. So could someone read verses 9? Oh, and one more thing. If it's entertainment I desire, I might as well resort to alcohol and cards. I suppose for monks, that's about as outrageous as it might have gotten 1,000 years ago. But the point is that, as Ziegler Control says, the passion to cherish the self through praise and fame is a form of addiction that we need to satisfy over and over. And if our aim is to fulfill an addiction to temporary pleasure, we might as well go for things like cards and alcohol. Although nowadays we have even more extreme things that we can get ourselves mindlessly lost in. But could somebody read verses 92 and 93?
Steve.
I lose my life, my wealth I squander, all for reputation's sake. What use are words, and whom will they delight when I am dead and in my grave? Children can't help crying when their sandcastles come crumbling down. My mind is so like them when praise and reputation start to fail.
So here again, first of all, we're asked to look at the lengths that people go to try to achieve, hold on to the things that come out of the eight worldly concerns about the eight worldly dharmas, that people go to crazy lengths to get ahead in whatever way they see themselves getting ahead. And that ultimately there's a futility to all of it, that in the end, we die and we take none of that with us, but we do take with us whatever negative karma we've accumulated when we pursued these things. But even in this life, we should realize that these things are temporary, illusory, that they change all the time. And the example that Shantideva gives is like a child crying when a wave knocks down their sandcastle. And that, as he says, and he's talking to himself, but he's also talking to us. My mind is so like them when praise and reputation start to fail, that we become attached and then become so distraught because we become attached to something that's ultimately illusory. We become depressed when we hear nasty words. And the point that he's making here is that we need to begin to see through this constant struggle. Could somebody read verses 94 through 97?
Ludro.
Short-lived sound, devoid of intellect, can never in itself intend to praise me. I say that it's the joy that others take in me. It's this that is the cause of my delight. But what is it to me if others take delight in someone else, or even in myself? Their pleasures, theirs and theirs alone, no part of it is felt by me. If I am happy at the joy of those who take delight, then everyone should be a source of joy to me. When people take delight in others, why am I not happy at their pleasure? The satisfaction that is mine from thinking I am being praised is unacceptable to common sense, and nothing but the antics of a silly child.
Yeah, so here he's really asking us to look quite directly at what it is that makes us happy about receiving praise and recognition of some kind. And he begins by saying it's not the sound of the words themselves. I mean, if that were true, we could just make a recording and listen to it all the time and we'd be happy. So we can't say it's the words. So then we could say it's the mind behind the words. In other words, I can say it's the joy that others take in me. But that's actually, as he says, that's the other person's experience. They're the ones who are happy. It's the other person's, what if, to me, if others take delight? It's their happiness, their pleasures and theirs alone. So it can't be exactly that either. And then he says we could say that we're happy because it's some type of sympathetic joy. But then why don't we feel this when other people experience praise? So this is so it's not a true joy, and the point is that there's constant ups and downs. That what brings praise today might lead to insignificance or even blame or scorn of some kind tomorrow. So that the attachment that we have to reputation and praise really doesn't make sense. As he says, it's like a child becoming all upset about a sandcastle that gets knocked down easily by a wave. And that it's self-deception to say that, it's self-deception from saying that the satisfaction is mine, that this is any kind of sympathetic joy, because it's really not. And this is very similar to some of the logic he uses in verses 76 and 86. Could somebody read verse 98?
Sarah.
Praise and compliments distract me, sapping my revulsion with samsara. I start to envy others their good qualities, and thus all excellence is ruined.
Okay, so here is continuing to ask why we become so attached to praise, recognition, fame, all of these things. And the point that he's making here is that preoccupation with this, attachment to this, clinging to this, saps our revulsion with samsara. That we always want more, that it becomes a distraction. We become dependent on praise and end up just relying on the whims of others. And the other thing is, to the extent that it's any temporary satisfaction, even though it's illusory, again, like a sandcastle that gets knocked down by a wave, that it weakens our renunciation with samsara. And even worse, our envy of others becomes increased. As he says, I start to envy others their good qualities because we become so attached to it. So again, all of these verses, 90 through 111, relate to practicing patience when we don't get what we want. And beginning with verse 99, he's going to be presenting us with a different attitude that we could take toward people who actually present some type of criticism or negativity toward us. So could somebody read verses 99 through 101?
Mark.
Those who stay close by me then to damage my good name and cut me down to size are surely there protecting me from falling into realms of grief. For I am one who strives for freedom. I must not be caught by wealth and honors. How could I be angry with the ones who work to free me from my fetters? They, like Buddha's very blessing, bar my way, determined as I am to plunge myself headlong in sorrow. How can I be angry with them?
So I say here we're talking about developing a very different attitude toward people, toward adverse circumstances or toward negative encounters with others. That normally it's something we reject, push away, react aggressively to. And Shantideva's point is that rather than being angry, we can actually appreciate that these kinds of circumstances rouse us from complacency or awaken us out of numbness, and that they save us from spinning endlessly in samsara. That, again, praise, as he says in the previous verse 98, can sap our revulsion with samsara. But these encounters, even these challenging encounters, actually can help us. And that we can therefore regard anyone or anything that thwarts our conventional aims as an emissary of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. That pursuing, Zigar Contral says that pursuing samsara is like having a beautiful dream while walking on the edge of the cliff. And that even though it may be abrupt and harsh, that we actually appreciate being woken up. And that it points out that this attitude, and in fact this entire chapter, ultimately come down to working with the roots of our suffering and painful states of mind, our attachment to our sense of self, and the ensuing obsession with cherishing and protecting the self. And it's this self-importance that underlies all the ways in which we become lost in aggression instead of enjoying peace and freedom. So we can actually appreciate those situations and those people who wake us up, perhaps not intentionally, as we'll see in a moment, but that it can actually serve as a reminder to wake up. So could somebody read verses 102 and 103?
Carolyn.
I should not be irritated, saying, there are obstacles to my good deeds. For is not patience the supreme austerity? And should I not abide by this? And if I fail to practice patience, hindered by my own shortcomings, I myself create impediments to merit's causes, yet so close at hand.
Okay, so here again, a couple of points that Shantideva is making. The first thing is that the main threat to our happiness, our ability to develop ourselves, to wake up, really doesn't come from outside. It comes from how we respond ourselves. And that, in fact, we should come to see the loss of temper, the beginning to get angry as a wake-up call, and that rather than becoming dismayed, see it as a practice. And that with that, we shouldn't blame others. We shouldn't be irritated, saying they're obstacles to our good deeds, but rather see them as helpers. That this is a big change of attitude. It's similar to what we talked about last week. But what Shantideva says is that when we don't get what we want, we should appreciate that as an opportunity to wake up right on the spot, rather than falling into resentment and anger. Could someone read verses 104 to 108?
Trip.
Yes, sorry, I was taking a note. What chapters?
104 to 108.
I mean, what? Thank you. If something does not come to be when something else is absent and does arise, that factor being present, that factor is indeed its cause. How can it then be said to hinder it? The beggars who arrive at proper times are not an obstacle to generosity. We cannot say that those who give the vows are hindrances to ordination. Keep going.
Yeah, to 108 through
Sorry about
108.
Okay. The beggars in this world are numerous. Assailants are comparatively few. For if I do no harm to others, others do no injury to me. So, like a treasure found at home that I have gained without fatigue, my enemies are helpers in my bodhisattva work, and therefore they should be a joy to me. Since I have grown in patience, thanks to them its first fruits I should give. For my patience they have been the cause.
So here in these verses, we're again continuing to talk about developing a different attitude toward the people who irritate us, who challenge us, and toward circumstances that challenge us. The point of if something does not come to be when it's absent and does arise, that factor being present is the point here is that an effect can only come about in the presence of its cause. So the point is opponents or negative circumstances, how can they hinder the development of patience? That the cause of patience is being provoked, and it's not the absence of provocation, and that the only true hindrance is our own. This is Zigar Kongtrul. The only true hindrance is our own failure to recognize and then seize the opportunity by letting ourselves react habitually with aggression or retaliation. So rather here, patience is staying in awareness and compassion regardless of circumstances, and coming to see that it's these situations and these people who irritate us who are the reason that we can develop patience. And so therefore, we could actually meet these situations with appreciation and joy. And he gives us an example of this, that beggars are not an obstacle of generosity, that it's beggars that give us the opportunity to practice generosity. And in the same way, situations and people that irritate us, situations where we don't get what we want and so on, are precisely the situation that gives us the opportunity to work on what we need to work on. And he gives the example that having this opportunity to practice patience is like finding a rare jewel. So could somebody read verse 109?
Steve.
And if I say my foes should not be honored, since they did not mean to stimulate my patience, why do I revere the sacred Dharma, cause indeed of my attainment?
So the point here is we might say, well, why should we feel joyful about people? They don't intend to make us be patient. They intended to irritate us or attack us or whatever it is. And the point that he's making is, well, why do we then revere the Dharma? Again, remember that he's talking to a group of monks who would have studied Dharma extensively. Why do I revere the Dharma? Since the Dharma as a written word really doesn't have any intention any way toward us either. Could somebody read? So again, it's illogical, and really the main point ultimately is what's the effect that comes about. But could somebody read verses 110 and 111?
Philip.
These enemies conspired to harm me, I protest, and therefore should receive no honors. But had they worked to help me like a doctor, how could I have brought forth patience? Thanks to those whose minds are full of malice, I engender patience in myself. They, therefore, are the causes of my patience, fit for veneration, like the Dharma.
So the point that he's making in these two verses is the very fact that people have a negative intention toward us that allows us to practice patience, that a doctor could do all kinds of things that are harmful to us. But because we know their intention is positive, we're able to bear with it, whether it's a shot or an operation or whatever it might be. So that situation doesn't really evoke patience in the way that it does when we're confronted with someone whose mind is full of malice. So with that, So it's not just mental. We could think of this as mental manipulation. We could think of all that Shantideva says as mental manipulation. This is another point that Zigar Control makes. But what he says is if we take Shantideva's unconventional logic, in this case, the logic that we should actually be quite appreciative of the people and circumstances that challenge us in this way, that get us to let go of conventional pursuits or recognize their futility, that if we take this logic in seriously and integrate these reasonings into our thinking, that it becomes quite powerful in changing our view. And that we basically have to be ready to renounce samsara, that we really need the clarity to want to change our habits. And therefore, because our enemies bring benefit, Shantideva's point is, they're worthy of veneration. Verses 112 to 118 kind of continue with this, with the basic idea that we can't attain enlightenment without sentient beings. Or another way is to say that appreciating sentient beings, including the ones that irritate us, naturally counters aggression and resentment. Could somebody read verses 112 and 113?
Lodro.
And so the mighty sage has spoken of the field of beings, as well as of the field of conquerors. Many who brought happiness to beings have passed beyond, attaining to perfection. Thus, the state of Buddhahood depends on beings and on Buddhas equally. What kind of practice it is, then, that honors only Buddhas, but not beings?
So basically what he's saying is we should respect beings just as we respect the Buddha, because both are the causes of our enlightenment. Both are of equal value to us in terms of realizing our enlightened nature, our pure nature. Zigar Control goes further and actually quotes Tai Situ Rinpoche. And again, this is very traditional Buddhist belief that all beings have been our mother at some point in time. Actually, Tai Situ says all beings have been our mother, just as we've been a mother to all beings. All beings have been our father, just as we have been a father to all beings, our brother, sister, and our breakfast and lunch as well. So the point is that there's a mutual dependence, whether we like it or not. And that coming to appreciate sentient beings and the care that sentient beings, beginning perhaps with our parents or maybe our friends or whoever it is that we've had a positive and supportive connection with in this life, that the kindness that sentient beings have shown us through lifetimes is immeasurable, and that therefore sentient beings are worthy of appreciation, all sentient beings. Could somebody read verse 114?
Mark.
Not in the qualities of their minds, but in the fruits they give are they alike. In beings too, such excellence resides, and therefore beings and Buddhas are the same.
Okay. So in this verse, there's two things that he's saying. The first is that no, beings and Buddhas are not the same in their qualities, but they are the same in their ultimate nature. And the point is that Buddhas, for instance, don't need our generosity, but sentient beings do. So that's what allows us to practice generosity, just as it's beings that allow us to practice patience and so on. Verses 115 and 118, I'll just summarize quickly because we're running really short on time, but basically relate to having faith and confidence in Buddha and Dharma opens our minds and brings tremendous benefit. So both sentient beings and Buddhas bring us tremendous benefit. Verses 119 to 127 are founded on the point that kindness delights the Buddhas, and it's through practicing kindness and compassion to beings that we repay the kindness of teachers. So could somebody read verse 119?
Sarah.
The Buddhas are my true, unfailing friends. Boundless are the benefits they bring to me. How else may I repay their goodness, but by making living beings happy?
So again, this is the point that nothing brings more happiness to Buddhas than our practice and treating others with kindness, compassion, and understanding, that there's no greater offering we can make to Buddhas, to teachers, no greater offering we can make than our practice and our commitment to the path and to working ourselves free of confusion. Verses 120 through 127, I'm just going to summarize because, again, we're running really short on time. That basically points out that the Buddhas, in attaining enlightenment, sacrificed their lives for us, that they took great pains in order to attain enlightenment. And that, so why do we hold back from benefiting others? And also points out that if we're cruel to others, because Buddhas care for all beings, that this brings distress, you could say, to Buddhas, that we offend the Buddhas because we cause pain. They feel all beings' pain just as if it were their own. And verses 128 to the end relate to the karmic consequences of how we treat others. Could someone read verses 128 through 130?
Carolyn.
Imagine that the steward of a king does injury to multitudes of people. Those with clear, far-seeing eyes do not respond with violence, even if they can. For stewards, after all, are not alone. They are supported by the kingly power. Therefore, I will not despise the feeble beings tormenting me. Their allies are the guardians of hell and also the compassionate Buddhas. Therefore, living beings I will gratify as subjects might placate a wrathful king.
Okay, so in the previous set of verses, we were given another reason for treating all sentient beings with kindness and compassion, because it delights the Buddhas. Here, we're being warned about the karmic consequences when we act in negative, aggressive, resentful, jealous, hateful ways. And the example that's given is an extended metaphor that a steward of the king, the representative of the king, say the example that Zigar Contral gives is like a tax collector, and that they might be rude and demanding, but they have power behind them, so we kind of have to grin and bear it. And that the equivalent of this is that sentient beings, however they may present themselves to us, they are also loved by the Buddhas. So that's one of the powers behind them, just as the tax collector has the power behind him of the king. But the other is karmic consequence, that how we treat others affects the circumstances and situations, the moods and attitudes that we find ourselves in. So that, again, even if we don't believe in karma over lifetimes, we can certainly see in this lifetime how our actions condition our attitudes and behaviors now. And as Zigar Contral says, the more we observe karma, the more instinctively we'll adopt positive behavior, which brings positive circumstances. And that we realize that giving in to little grievances actually strengthens aggression. So could somebody read verses 131 and 132?
Steve.
And yet the pains of hell to be endured through making living beings suffer, could these ever be unleashed on me by all the ire of such a king? And even if that king were pleased, enlightenment he could not give to me, for this will only be achieved by bringing happiness to beings.
There's a bit of a shift in the metaphor here, but so with verse 131, with verse 131, if we did treat the representative of the king, say we did boot out the tax collector, what's the worst that could happen? We might go to jail, we might lose wealth and property. But if we act out of anger, this is the point that he's making here, if we act out of anger, the consequences are far greater, with the ultimate being the risk of a hellish rebirth. And if we do pay taxes, what's the best that can happen? In other words, if we do engage in conventional pursuits, what's the best that can happen? So again, even if the king were pleased, we still wouldn't be enlightened. But this will only be the only way we can achieve enlightenment is by working for the happiness of other beings. So the last verses, 133 and 134, he talks about really the benefits of patience. That besides future Buddhahood, that even in samsara, that future Buddhahood that's brought about through bringing happiness to beings, that even in this lifetime, in samsara, will achieve glory, fame, pleasure, even in this lifetime, and that patience in samsara brings such things as beauty, health, and good renown. Its fruit is great longevity, a long life, and the vast contentment of a universal king. So even in conventional terms, the practice of patience, non-aggression, brings tremendous benefit. But of course, from a bodhisattva point of view, these things are accomplished without directly striving for them. So with that, sorry, I've gone over by a couple of minutes, but we've reached the end of the patience chapter. Again, if people are interested in reading further, I really recommend Peaceful Heart, this book by Zikr Control. And I just wanted to say that I won't be present for the next 3 weeks because Sue and I will be traveling to India on a pilgrimage to the sites of the life of the Buddha. But I'll be thinking of you all, and thank you very much. And I guess we should close with the prayer for peace and dedication of merit. And do come to discussion group tomorrow night, if you can.
By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you,
That
That
Michael.
was wonderful.
Thank you all.
was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Take care. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Did you get a recording, John? Should I send you mine?